It was early morning. Francisca was riding along a picturesque country road on her favorite red bicycle, which her father had given her for her 13th birthday. The sun was shining brightly in the sky, but the girl didn't feel hot. A cool breeze pleasantly caressed her face, gently playing with her long wavy hair. Francisca felt lighter and more carefree than ever. All paths were open before her. She stopped by the side of the road, leaned her bicycle against a tree, and took out a blanket, a bundle of sandwiches, and a thermos of cocoa from the basket. Settling down on the grass, Francisca eagerly began to devour her breakfast. Suddenly, the bundle of remaining sandwiches stirred, emitting a dreadful rattling sound. Francisca, horrified, covered her ears with her hands and woke up. An old alarm clock was ringing. Outside, dawn was just breaking. Francisca sighed as she turned off the alarm and forced herself to get out of bed. If I don't get up now, it will be even harder later, the woman reminded herself mentally. Rising from bed and feeling for her old worn slippers, Francisca headed to the bathroom, yawning as she went. There, she washed her face with cool water to fully wake up and looked at herself in the mirror. Yes, she was no longer the carefree 13-year-old girl she had dreamed of. Dark circles under her eyes reminded her of chronic sleep deprivation, and wrinkles around her eyes reminded her that she would turn 34 in a month. Again, I don't have time to wash my hair, Francisca thought sadly. I'll have to use hairpins and hairspray. She quickly tidied herself up and went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast for the children. Let them sleep a little longer, Francisca thought, glancing briefly at the clock. Although raising children alone was difficult, she did her best to prolong their carefree childhood. Francisca got married early. She couldn't wait to leave her childhood home as soon as possible. She couldn't say she had an unhappy childhood or that her parents treated her badly. It's just that's what all her older sisters did, and Francisca didn't want to be left behind. In the end, she chose the most handsome guy in town and persuaded him to leave for the mainland right after the wedding. Her husband didn't want to leave his hometown, but the girl insisted. She had always been stubborn and independent, just like her father. Francisca gave birth to 3 children for her beloved husband, and then something went wrong in their marriage, as if an invisible chain that had bound them all this time suddenly lost one of its links. Her husband started staying late at work, while Francisca stayed home with the children all the time. Finally, the girl couldn't take it anymore and demanded that her husband hire a nanny for the children so that she could also leave the house. Her husband agreed, and Francisca got a job at an art gallery. There were often exhibitions and other events there, which meant the girl had to be constantly in the public eye. She dressed beautifully, which her husband didn't like at all, as he was used to her always waiting for him at home. Her husband began to be jealous of Francisca, even though there was no reason for it. In the end, the free-spirited young woman couldn't take it anymore, gathered the children, and left. She had to quit her job at the gallery. The salary there wasn't very high, and it was impossible to live on the alimony her ex-husband paid. Francisca got a job as a waitress in a fairly good restaurant, and at night, while the children slept, she worked as a bartender in a nightclub. Elderly parents had long been inviting her back to the island where she grew up, but Francisca was too proud to accept their invitation. Besides, she had no desire to return to the tiny town where only old people and single mothers like herself lived. I'd rather work 2 jobs to death than die of boredom, Francisca thought to herself, finishing breakfast. The clock showed almost 7:30, time to wake the children. It's unknown how it would have all ended if one day, someone from work hadn't called her on her only day off. Usually, Francisca would turn off her phone, knowing she wouldn't get any peace, but this time, she had agreed a week ago to meet her childhood friend Ramona to take the kids to the amusement park, and now she was waiting for her call. When the manager's number lit up on the display, Francisca hesitated for a moment, but eventually brought the phone to her ear and answered. "Sis, dear, we really need your help." Mario quickly blurted out, as if afraid she would change her mind and hang up. "What happened?" Francisca asked wearily. "Carlita got sick. We need someone to cover for her. I'll pay double the rate." Francisca sighed. Of course, she had promised the kids to take them to the park and had already arranged with Ramona. But the increased pay would be very handy for them right now. The rent for the apartment was due soon. Francisca decided that Ramona, being a mother of many like herself, would easily handle everything. "I'll come, but only for 3 to 4 hours," Francisca quickly and confidently replied. "You're paying for the whole shift." Mario grunted into the phone but didn't dare to refuse. No one else but Francisca would agree to work on their day off. Half an hour later, Francisca was putting on her branded apron and tucking away her unruly wavy hair under a kerchief she had managed to wash today. "You look good," Mario winked as he passed by. "I could look even better if it weren't for work," Francisca thought sarcastically to herself. Sighing, she began to set out napkin holders on the tables. At this hour, there were hardly any visitors, and while doing her usual task, Francisca absent-mindedly looked out onto the street through the large panoramic windows. She didn't immediately notice the large car of an unusual crimson shade, although it instantly caught the attention of all passers-by and restaurant staff. "It looks like the king himself decided to have lunch with us," someone chuckled. This remark snapped Francisca out of her reverie, and she looked with interest at the magnificent car. She had been to the capital many times when she was still married and had seen all sorts of expensive cars there, but in their relatively small town, no one drove such cars. "Who could have decided to visit us?" the woman said, intrigued. She had loved the color red since childhood, as well as anything new and unknown. Her curiosity knew no bounds. From the bright red car emerged a tall, dignified man in a dark and evidently expensive suit. His black hair was smoothly slicked back, and his eyes were hidden behind fashionable sunglasses. He walked around the car and took a small leather briefcase from the adjacent seat. "Wow, quite the businessman," exclaimed one of the waiters. "Sis, he's yours," Mario quickly decided. No one, including Francisca, was surprised by his words. The woman had been working here for a long time and was the most experienced among the waitstaff. Everyone was accustomed to her serving the most distinguished visitors. As the man entered, Francisca politely greeted him and escorted him to a free table by the window. He thanked the woman, staring intently at her face, which slightly unsettled her. "Your menu," Francisca said, placing a rather heavy dark brown folder on the table. "I'll come back to take your order when you're ready." With these words, she nodded slightly and left. The man removed his glasses and contemplatively watched her for a while before starting to peruse the menu. Francisca exited the dining area into the kitchen, removed her apron, and as a precaution, went to the restroom to glance at herself in the mirror. Her reflection was entirely ordinary, light makeup still slightly masking the fatigue on her face. "Strange," Francisca muttered aloud. "Why was he looking at me like that?" She absent-mindedly adjusted her hair and returned. Donning her apron again, she peeked into the dining area and noticed the man was ready to order. "What can I get you?" Francisca kindly asked, pulling a notepad and pencil from her apron pocket. Once again, the man cast a long, scrutinizing gaze at her, making her feel somewhat uncomfortable. "Excuse me," the man suddenly said. His voice was unexpectedly high for his stature. "You don't have a badge. May I know your name?" "Francisca," the woman replied. "Francisca." The man murmured softly, nodding to himself. Then his gaze shifted back to the menu pages. "Please bring me the seafood pasta and raspberry lemonade." Francisca headed to the kitchen to relay the order to the chef, then returned to the dining area and stood beside the bartender, a tall, bald man who had begun preparing the lemonade. She still couldn't shake off the strange feeling provoked by the wealthy visitor's intense gaze. "Why did he ask for my name?" she wondered. "It doesn't seem like mere curiosity." While the bartender was adding mint to the lemonade, she cleared the utensils and glanced at the visitor again. He sat slouched, staring into space as if recalling something. Catching her eye, he weakly smiled at her and retreated into himself once more. A few more minutes passed, and Francisca was called from the kitchen. She hurried to fetch the prepared pasta and, grabbing the lemonade from the bar counter, headed towards the table where the man sat. Placing the plate of steaming pasta and a glass of lemonade on the table, she was about to leave when the visitor called her by name. "Francisca, I apologize for my audacity, but may I ask you a personal question?" he murmured, and the woman keenly felt his discomfort. "Yes, of course," she replied submissively, puzzled as to why this wealthy businessman needed to address a simple waitress. He gestured for her to sit. Francisca glanced around. It was forbidden to engage in conversations with guests, let alone sit at their tables. However, the situation was unusual. Francisca understood that this man wasn't about to flirt with her, so she cautiously sat at the edge of the chair opposite him. The man looked into her eyes again and then asked, "Francisca, may I know where you spent your childhood?" What a strange question. Francisca expected anything but this. "On one of the islands southeast of the mainland," she answered, unable to contain her curiosity. "But why do you ask?" The businessman weakly smiled in response and nervously adjusted his perfectly tied tie. "Well, I grew up there too." "You don't recognize me, sis?" Francisca was so stunned that she couldn't immediately find words to respond. For several minutes, she sat with her mouth open, skeptically staring at the wealthy visitor. Did he decide to joke with her? She was absolutely sure she had never seen him before. None of her childhood friends could jump so high. "No. I don't remember you," she finally murmured softly. The man turned, noticing they were being watched. "This isn't the best place for a conversation," he quickly whispered. "Here's my card. Call me when you're free." With these words, he took out a black cardboard rectangle with gold-embossed letters from his breast pocket and placed it on the table next to Francisca. Nodding, the woman took the card and tucked it into the apron pocket. Then she rose from the table and walked back to the bar counter. The bartender raised his eyebrows in surprise, then playfully winked, but Francisca just shrugged in response. "He was asking if he could rent the hall for a banquet," she calmly explained. The bartender chuckled in response. "A guy like him could buy our restaurant with all its trimmings, let alone rent a hall," he grumbled, pulling out a clean napkin from the drawer. "If I were him, I'd choose something more decent." "Yeah, but you're not him," Francisca laughed good-naturedly, and the bartenders chuckled along with her. However, the woman still couldn't get over the conversation with the visitor. She felt for the business card in her pocket, wanting to reassure herself that it wasn't all in her imagination. Francisca wouldn't be surprised by hallucinations, as she had slept very little and had been working tirelessly for a long time without a break. The business card was there. She really wanted to pull it out of her pocket to read the man's name, but she didn't dare. "I'll wait until he leaves," Francisca thought to herself. Finally, the man finished his meal and asked for the bill. After paying, he took his briefcase, nodded at Francisca, and left the room. Moments later, his car pulled out of the parking lot and disappeared around the corner. Francisca picked up the tray and approached the table where the strange stranger had been sitting. She started clearing the dishes and found a note under an empty glass, along with a stack of banknotes. "Waiting for a call" was written on a simple sheet of paper. Francisca glanced at the money. It was a decent stack. She quickly glanced around and, seeing that no one was watching her, tucked the banknotes into the pocket of her apron, where the man's business card already lay. Then, with habitual movements, she collected the dishes on the tray and headed to the kitchen. "What a strange day," Mario said as she passed by. "No kidding," Francisca nodded. "I'm off home." "Already?" the manager exclaimed. "It's time to pick up the kids from the park," the woman said and went to change in the staff room. There, alone, she pulled out the stack of banknotes from her pocket. Counting the money, Francisca nearly fainted. The businessman had left her $1,000 in tips. It was unheard of. "Who are you?" Francisca muttered, taking out the business card from her pocket. "Benito Morales," read the golden letters. Unable to believe her eyes, Francisca sat down on a chair against the wall, never taking her eyes off the business card. "But this just can't be," she exclaimed aloud. She closed her eyes, and memories took her back many, many years. When Francisca turned 13, her father gave her a brand new red bicycle. No one else in their tiny town, nestled along the rocky shore, had such a bike. With the sea on one side and a dormant volcano on the other, that was the world of young Francisca. Their town was the only settlement on the island. Once, people had also lived right under the volcano, but now only semi-destroyed buildings covered in volcanic dust remained there. Francisca and the other kids sometimes rode their bikes there for excavations, as they called it. They climbed abandoned buildings, explored long-abandoned houses in search of forgotten or lost items. Any treasures they found quickly went into their pockets, so no one else could take them away. Of all the buildings that remained after the volcano eruption, the kids avoided exploring only one, the old, half-destroyed bell tower. Among the children, there was a legend that a ghost of a monk still inhabited it, who used to live in a nearby cottage. One of the older kids swore that once, exactly at midnight, he heard the bells ringing, but it was more than unlikely. None of the children dared to stay overnight in the empty abandoned town. When Francisca first appeared on the street with her red bicycle, she caused a sensation. The girl sat on the leather seat like a queen, and the kids surrounded her, examining the novelty and exclaiming in admiration. "So, are we going to the volcano?" she briskly asked as soon as the excitement subsided a bit. "Hold on, sis," said Raoul, the eldest of the boys. "We have another matter to attend to here." Francisca impatiently shrugged her shoulders. "What could there possibly be to do here?" she said in a disgruntled tone. "Just boredom." Raoul grinned, revealing a row of uneven teeth. "These are manly matters. We need to teach someone a lesson." Francisca raised her eyebrows in surprise. "You mean Morales?" Raoul clenched his fists and nodded in response. "He needs to get what's coming to him," the boy muttered through his teeth. No one was unaware of the notorious incident. 12-year-old introvert and botany enthusiast Benito Morales had hit the toughest guy in school on the head with a book. Raoul couldn't let such an act go unpunished. Francisca squinted as she watched the boy rubbing his fist. "Oh, come on, Raoul. It's ridiculous." "So what? He hit him with a book. He's not capable of more. Forget about it and let's go. I want to test my bike. It has gear shifts." But Raoul stood his ground. "No, I said Benito will be punished. Nobody dares to lay a hand on me." "You provoked him yourself," Francisca retorted. She had seen the boys picking on the small, slender Benito several times. He couldn't boast strength or a sharp tongue. He was very quiet and usually sat somewhere in the corner with a book. Once, passing by Benito in the cafeteria, Francisca glanced over his shoulder. He was reading a book about insects and was carefully examining the structure of a bee at that moment. The girl shrugged. Such things had never interested her. Another time, she and her friend Camila noticed Benito collecting butterfly wings on the school's pathway. He had a matchbox in his hands where he stored his treasures. Then Raoul and his friends approached him, and Francisca saw how roughly the boy snatched the box from the bewildered Benito's hands. The girl just shook her head as she watched Raoul throw the box on the ground and crush it with his huge boot, while Benito stood silently beside him, head down. "You shouldn't be such a pushover," Camila scolded, who was head over heels in love with Raoul. But Francisca was thinking about something else. Her older sister was getting married, and today she was supposed to go with her to choose a wedding dress. She knew that after the wedding, the newlyweds would leave for the mainland, and she dreamed that one day she would do the same. Life on the island seemed unbearably slow to the girl. Grow up and get married soon, thought Francisca. At that time, she believed that marriage was the only way to leave the dull town behind. It never occurred to her that she could go to university and study elsewhere. "But at least he never complains," Camila added thoughtfully, bringing Francisca back to reality. "Oh, you're talking about Benito," the girl realized. "Yes, you're right. Even I would have told everything to my father by now if I were him." Francisca's father cherished her soul and always wanted the best for her. He forbade her from wearing her sister's hand-me-down clothes, and every few months, he would travel to the mainland to buy something new for his little girl. That's how she got the best bicycle in the world, the envy of all the kids. And now Francisca couldn't wait to ride it. Wait up, sis. I've got a plan, Roll said, leaning over to whisper in her ear. Francisca didn't like what she heard, but she didn't take the boy's words seriously. Besides, at that moment, she couldn't think of anything else but her bicycle. So she quickly jumped on the seat and raced down the street. Come on, slowpokes, she shouted, looking back at the boys and laughing loudly. The wind tousled her hair, and she sped down the street like a whirlwind. The boys could barely keep up with her. The day promised to be hot and sunny, not a cloud in the sky. Francisca abruptly stopped in front of Benito Morales' house. The breathless boys stopped next to her. Benito's house was very small and quite poor. Old laundry hung on lines, and neglected roses wilted in pots. Hey, Benito! Come out! Raul yelled. Will you come with us on an expedition? Francisca shouted. She knew Benito had an old bicycle handed down from his father, but she doubted the boy would agree to such an adventure. She had never seen him in the abandoned town by the volcano. He's a real homebody, Francisca condescendingly thought about Benito. The door creaked, and a slender figure appeared in the doorway. Benito, as usual, wore glasses, but for the first time, the girl saw him not in a school uniform. He wore beige trousers and a loose white shirt. Why are you calling me? Benito asked. His voice trembled, but that didn't mean he was nervous. As far as Francisca remembered, Morales always spoke with a high, squeaky voice. Why not? Raul smirked. Benito adjusted his glasses, clearly trying to figure out what was really behind the unexpected invitation. We're not friends, you know, the boy reasoned. But we can be, Raul replied. Really? Benito was surprised. Francisca began to be annoyed by this pointless conversation. She wanted to ride, to fly, to rush at full speed. She clenched her teeth fiercely and crossed her arms over her chest, showing with all her demeanor that it was time to wrap things up. Of course, meanwhile, Raul said, his voice sounding overly sweet. Francisca even cringed at the blatant insincerity. But I'm not like you, Benito admitted frankly. Raul rang the bell on the handlebars and clicked his tongue. You used to not be like us, he said, stretching out the words like taffy. But yesterday you hit me, and I realized that you're actually brave and bold. So now I offer you friendship. So, are you coming with us? And Raul smiled at the bewildered Morales with the friendliest smile he could muster. Benito adjusted his glasses again, tousled his hair. It was evident that he was completely confused and didn't know what to think. My bike. It's quite old, the boy finally spoke. If you want, we can go get my older brother's bike, Raul replied. He'd be happy to lend it to you. Benito didn't expect this at all. He had never been invited anywhere before, and he was completely unaccustomed to such caring attention. He didn't even spare his brother's bike. What a snake, Francisca thought to herself, feeling her patience wearing thin. Come on, agree already, or we're leaving, she impatiently exclaimed. Benito shifted his gaze from Raul to the girl and unexpectedly nodded. Okay, I'll just let my mom know, he quickly said and disappeared behind the door. Raul chuckled. Hey, did you guys hear that? He's just going to let his mom know. How cute. The other kids laughed too. Only Francisca, biting her lip, remained silent. Firstly, she didn't think Benito would agree. Secondly, she just couldn't stand being in the city any longer. The road to the volcano always captivated her, allowing her to feel the long-awaited freedom. Then it seemed to her that all paths were open before her. Benito appeared at the doorstep again. This time, he had a bulky canvas bag in his hands. Hey, just don't bring books with you. Raul laughed, followed by the rest of the kids. In the bag, there are sandwiches and juice, Benito explained. Mom thought we might get hungry on the way. Very thoughtful of her, said Francisca. Well, can we finally set off now? With these words, she hopped onto the bike seat first and pedaled fiercely. The other kids followed suit. Raul and Benito rode on the luggage rack at the back. "I bet you survive on just sandwiches alone," the guy muttered, pushing hard on the pedals. "Sorry," Benito said, trying to take up as little space as possible. They stopped at Raul's house, and the boy went to fetch his brother's bike. "Did you even ask him for permission?" Francisca sarcastically inquired. "My brother is on the mainland right now, working, so he probably won't need the bike anytime soon," Raul retorted, and the girl felt envy creeping into her heart. She would give anything to be somewhere far away from home right now, away from these dim-witted boys she had to deal with. They set course for the volcano, and of course, Francisca led the procession. No one could not only surpass her, but even keep up with her speedy bicycle. The girl felt the power and independence, something she had long sought. The wind fiercely tousled her hair, the sky suddenly clouded over, but Francisca paid no attention. She sped along the dusty road, not even bothering to avoid the small rocks, feeling as if wings were spreading behind her back. The boys followed her in a pack, and Benito on Raul's bike fell further behind. He wasn't used to physical activity, and the road to the volcano was unfamiliar to him. Raul kept stopping and waiting for the clumsy racer. Of course, he was worried not about Morales, but about his brother's bike. Finally, the kids reached the ruined city. The clouds had completely taken over the sky. It seemed that rain was about to start. Not the best weather for excavations, Raul muttered gloomily. But Francisca didn't care. She got what she wanted. She outdid all the boys and was the first to reach the city. The search for treasures absolutely did not interest her. But Benito was glowing with surprise and delight. He had never been to a city near a volcano before, and now his exploratory mind thirsted for new experiences. The kids lazily scattered in different directions. Francisca climbed onto a partly destroyed wall, leaning her bike against it, and now sat there, swinging her leg and thinking to herself. Raul followed Benito relentlessly, who was eagerly studying the surroundings, examining every speck of dust and crack in the stone. Raul quickly grew tired of this, and looking at the gloomy sky, he decided it was time to put his plan into action. "Hey, Morales," he called out to the boy. Morales looked up at him thoughtfully. "Did you know that there's an old bell tower further on? Apparently, pigeons live there. They're all white, not a single spot, I swear to you." "Seriously?" Benito asked, his eyes lighting up with joy and amazement. "Let's go see." "Of course," nodded Raul. "I'll call everyone now." Turning around, he let out a piercing whistle. "Hey, over here. Let's go to the bell tower," he shouted, and his voice echoed anxiously in the empty abandoned houses. Francisca snapped out of her daydreams and looked at Raul with concern. Was he really going to do what he whispered in her ear before they left? Was he really capable of it? Francisca jumped off the wall straight into the dust and approached the boys. "Let's have a snack first," she suggested briskly. "We've been waiting for Morales for so long for a reason." The boys nodded in agreement. Only Raul grimaced in dissatisfaction, but he didn't argue with the girl. Benito brought a bag of sandwiches and juice, and they began to enjoy them. "Your mom cooks pretty well," one of the guys approved. "You haven't tried her pancakes yet," Benito innocently replied. Raul smirked at him from the corner of his eye. Francisca could feel his mood. Raul was clearly set on revenge. A roll of thunder echoed from somewhere near the volcano. "I hope there won't be an eruption now," Benito joked with his mouth full. No one laughed. Finally, they finished their sandwiches, and Raul led Morales to the bell tower. The others followed suit, with Francisca now trailing behind. She felt her stomach tighten. Such spasms usually occurred when she was very nervous. She tried to reassure herself that Raul was just joking and that she didn't really care about Benito's fate, but it didn't help much. Suddenly, Raul began to tell a terrifying story about the ghost of a hermit monk inhabiting the bell tower, and because the weather had worsened, his words sounded more ominous than ever. A large raindrop suddenly fell on Francisca's forehead. "Raul, we should head back," she said anxiously, but it seemed impossible to stop him. "Just showing Benito the white doves, and we'll go," Roll replied, and this seemingly innocent remark triggered another spasm in the girl's stomach. However, Morales himself seemed oblivious. He was too impressed by everything around him. The bell tower loomed in the distance against the darkening sky. Its elongated silhouette inspired dreadful fear in Francisca. As they approached, Roll impatiently nudged Benito towards the tall door, miraculously almost untouched. "You go first," he said, and unsuspecting Morales pulled the door towards himself. It creaked open, and the boy peered inside. The room smelled of stale dust and something ancient and unfathomable. Roll sneezed. "It's dark in there," Benito muttered, shuddering. "Take this," Roll replied, handing him his flashlight. The boy hesitantly took the flashlight, still unsure whether he should enter. "Come on, hurry up," Roll couldn't wait and roughly pushed Benito in the shoulder. "Don't be a coward." Benito darted inside. In the same second, Roll slammed the door shut and leaned against it. "Guys, hurry, get the rocks," he exclaimed. Benito tried to open the door from the inside, and when he failed, he banged on it with all his might. "Open up, I want to get out." Francisca heard his muffled voice. But the guys were busy hauling rocks to barricade the door. With his arms crossed over his chest, Roll watched the process with satisfaction. "Hey, Roll, are you serious?" Overcoming another spasm, Francisca lunged at him. "Are you really going to leave him here all night? Let him get acquainted with the monk." Roll chuckled. "I think they'll find common ground." The other boys supported him with a hearty laugh. "Do they even have brains of their own?" the girl thought irritably. She grabbed Roll by the sleeve. "You can't do this," protested Francisca. "Who said so?" Roll frowned, pulling his arm away. "But hitting me with a book on the head is okay?" The kids continued to haul rocks. Soon, a whole wall of cobblestones grew in front of the door. Benito's muffled cries and pleas never ceased for a moment. The sky became completely dim. It was time to head back. But how could she leave Morales here? "Roll, we're done here," said one of the boys, dusting off his hands. "Great," Roll muttered. "Now let's get out of here." He moved to leave, but Francisca blocked his path. "You're not leaving him here. Enough with the parrot act. He's learned his lesson." Roll challenged her with a gaze. "And who's going to stop me from leaving?" "You?" he retorted, his face contorted with anger. "Even me," Francisca replied fearlessly, glaring at Roll. She never feared anyone. "You're just a girl," he said dismissively, then spat on the ground, roughly pushing the girl aside and walking towards where the bicycles were left. Biting her lip in frustration, Francisca rubbed her shoulder. "Are you coming?" the boy asked without turning around. "Not with you," the girl snapped. "Suit yourself," Roll replied indifferently. When the boys were out of sight, Francisca cursed. "What a misfortune to get involved with these idiots," she exclaimed in frustration, scanning the stone wall. Benito had stopped knocking, and now it was quiet behind the door. Francisca looked up at the rapidly darkening sky. Another drop fell on her nose. "Maybe forget it," she thought, sniffing. "It's not worth driving in the dark. My own skin is more important." Making such a sensible decision, she turned to leave when suddenly she heard Benito crying again. Francisca stopped and looked at the pile of cobblestones once more. "Yeah, these jackals did a great job," she remarked sarcastically and, sighing, approached closer. The sobs could still be heard from behind the door. "Hey, Benito, stop crying," Francisca shouted, grabbing the top stone. "I'll get you out now." However, saying it was easier than doing it. For the entire following hour, Francisca struggled immensely to sort through and move the cobblestones aside. Shifting the rocks was tough, but the girl was accustomed to hardships. No one ever raised her like a princess. As it grew completely dark, Francisca began to feel for the stones. Benito fell silent, and the girl grew anxious. Had he lost consciousness from fear? Or perhaps, had he seen a ghostly monk? "Hey, Morales, are you alive in there?" Francisca called out, shivering. "Alive," the boy responded with lifeless echo. "Do you see the monk?" "Not yet." Francisca exhaled and reached for the next stone. To make the pitch darkness less frightening, she softly hummed a silly popular song she had heard on the radio that morning. Finally, the girl moved the last stone and grabbed the handle to open the door. A beam of light hit her face, and Francisca squinted, covering her face with her hand. "Oh, sorry," Benito squeaked, lowering the flashlight. "Quick, get out of here," Francisca ordered. Morales didn't hesitate. The children hurriedly ran to where the girl had left her bicycle. "I hope they didn't do anything to it," Francisca said anxiously. Benito, who was holding the girl's hand, silently squeezed her palm, diligently directing the flashlight onto the road. "I'm so grateful to you," he said quietly. "It's too early to thank me," the girl replied gruffly. "We're still very far from home." Fortunately, the red bicycle was still leaning against the wall where Francisca had left it. However, there was a huge ugly scratch on the frame, visible even in the dim light of the flashlight. "Damn it," the girl cursed and unexpectedly burst into tears. She felt deeply hurt for her bike and herself. And she also thought of her dad, who surely spent a lot of time choosing a gift for his beloved youngest daughter. Benito carefully inspected the scratch. "They did it with a sharp stone," he said. "I'm so sorry." Francisca sniffled a few more times, then wiped away her tears. "You'll sit on the luggage rack, and I'll ride you," she announced in a businesslike tone. But Benito shook his head. He didn't agree with this plan. "You're a girl," he argued. "Let me ride you." Francisca gave him a skeptical look. She was about to say that he wouldn't have enough strength, but at that very moment, they heard the sound of a motor from the road. Then the engine was turned off, and the kids heard the thud of car doors and excited voices. Several people approached them with flashlights. Francisca, the girl, recognized her dad's voice. "Benito," the boy's mom shouted. Francisca nearly went mad with joy. "We're here." "Here," she screamed with all her might, and a moment later found herself in her dad's strong embrace. Only then did she realize how scared she had been all this time, and tears welled up in her eyes again. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" "I'm here with you," her dad said affectionately. But Francesca couldn't calm down. "They scratched the bike," she wailed, realizing she was acting like a child. "Tomorrow you'll show who did it," her father declared fiercely. "And don't worry about the bike, we'll repaint it, and it'll be good as new." Raul and his gang were severely reprimanded by their parents when his father told them about the incident. The bike was indeed repainted, almost like new, just slightly darker, more cherry than red. Francesca liked the new color, but still felt a lingering unease. She never spoke to Raul again, nor even greeted him. 3 years later, he finished school and left the island, and 5 years later, Francesca herself finally left. The new life left her no place, nor time for reminiscence, and Benito Morales, along with the story of the abandoned bell tower, seemed to have been permanently erased from her memory. And now, the boy Francesca had saved over 10 years ago appeared again in her life's path. And how he had changed. The woman couldn't believe it for a long time. As promised, she dialed his number as soon as she left the restaurant. "Francesca, my dear, how glad I am to hear from you again. Thank you for calling." They arranged to meet in the park. While the restless children played on the playground, the adults sat on a bench, drinking coffee and reminiscing about childhood. "I was almost out of my mind with fear then," Benito confessed, recalling the abandoned bell tower. "I'm so grateful to you for not abandoning me." "Oh yes," Francesca laughed. "Those cobblestones haunted me for a long time after." "And for me, it was the ghost of the hermit monk," Benito confessed. They fell silent for a moment. "You have wonderful kids," Morales said, sighing. "And I never got married." I went to university, did research, got deeply into science, defended my dissertation. Then I started a business. And, as I see, succeeded. Francesca smiled. Benito only nodded modestly. Money gives the freedom I need to do what I love, he said. True, Francesca agreed. Mostly, I'm into investments now. Traveling the world, learning new things. It's all I love. And I came here by chance at the invitation of an old friend. He was my classmate, just as quiet as me. I probably wouldn't even recognize him now, Francesca admitted. Benito cast a quick glance at her, in which she noticed admiration. Of course, you were different. So brave, I would say fearless. I always admired your courage and straightforwardness, dreamed of being as bold. Seems like my boldness didn't help me much in life, Francesca said bitterly, then laughed. Now I prefer intelligence. Is there something you regret in life? Benito asked cautiously. Francesca looked pensive. If I could turn back time, I wouldn't rush into marriage. First, I would have finished university and obtained a good profession. Unfortunately, no one instilled this thought in my head earlier. But it's never too late to start over, right? Benito smiled. When you have 3 kids to take care of, everything becomes significantly more complicated. Benito nodded understandingly. Do you like your job? He asked. The woman laughed. It's not like serving hungry customers is my passion, Francisca admitted with a chuckle. But in my situation, I haven't come up with anything better. After all, I'm responsible for my little rascals. Morales looked at Francisca intently, as if wanting to say something but hesitating. He hasn't changed at all, still as shy, she thought. Noticing a faint rim in the man's eyes, she smiled and asked, Do you think glasses are no longer in style? Benito felt embarrassed. I always wear glasses at home, he confessed. Good old Benito, Francisca warmly laughed. The kids ran up and began clamoring about how hungry they were. Sorry, Benito, we have to go, the woman said, rising from the bench. It was nice seeing you again. And, thank you for the money. It will be very helpful. With these words, Francisca wanted to leave, but Benito held her hand. Listen, he said, looking at her eyes with embarrassment. Once you helped me. Now I want to do something for you, Francisca. Surprised, the woman didn't know what to say. Benito also stood up from the bench, still holding Francisca's hand. The kids impatiently pulled at her skirt, but she paid no attention, feeling the significance of the moment. I want to help you with your job, Morales said firmly. I'm sure you deserve a better life. Let me do this for you. Francisca felt tears welling up in her eyes. She had become so accustomed to taking care of others that she had completely forgotten what it was like when someone showed interest in her life. When she mattered to someone. Oh, Benito, that's really not necessary, she stammered, feeling flustered. But I feel it's what you need right now. Not just need, but it's necessary. I see the tiredness in your eyes. It shouldn't be like this. I want to see you as the old Francisca again, radiant and full of energy. Francisca never thought something like this could happen to her in reality. I'm so grateful to you, Benito, she said, touched. For your words and your offer. But you know I don't have a good education. What else have you been doing? Benito asked inquisitively. Francisca gazed thoughtfully into the distance. Memories of her previous life vividly flashed in her mind. She rarely allowed them to do so, but now she couldn't contain them. I used to work in an art gallery. I organized meetings with masters, came up with and implemented various ideas, and had many conversations with interesting people. Morales listened to her very attentively. You know, Francisca, I actually need someone like you. I'm planning to give a series of performances around the world, and I'm looking for an assistant who could negotiate with various cultural spaces and business centers. You know I'm too shy to handle these matters on my own. And he smiled at her with his shy smile. Francisca nodded, her heart overflowing with joy. "Mom, when are we going to eat?" impatiently shouted her younger son. A shadow crossed Francisca's face. "And what about my children? I can't leave them for long." "It won't be for long. A couple of days for each trip will be more than enough. I'll pay for a nanny separately." Overwhelmed with emotions, Francisca couldn't help but hug Morales. "I'm so happy." "Thank you, Benito." He nodded in response, his eyes gleaming with boyish excitement. "Now go, or your hungry kids will demolish the entire park," Benito said, and they both laughed. Dear viewers, if you enjoyed the story, please support the video by liking it and leaving a comment. Thank you very much.
Alright, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their inn. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong. Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. I didn't do anything wrong. You're still saying that? Look at him. Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract? Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go. Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him. There's no way he was pushed aside. Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he? I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.